I want to explain.
What's there to explain?
But I just want
Look,
to say that...
I'm not the first guy who fell in love with a girl he met in a restaurant who then turned out to be the daughter of a kidnapped scientist, only to lose her to a childhood lover who she'd last seen on a deserted island and who turned out 15 years later to be the leader of the French underground.
I know. It all sounds like some bad movie.
Perhaps the most difficult part of discussing metafiction is defining the term itself. In a sense, any attempt to define it results in a contradiction because metafiction is fiction that turns itself back on itself and thus challenges pre-existing notions of certainty, consciousness, and reality. This, of course, includes the certainty of creating one single definition. That a work refers to itself, as the term meta implies, means that it will inevitably reconsider and redraw itself over and over again in the minds of its readers, and in so doing, it will resist definition. Metafiction exhibits a self-reflective awareness of the methods of its own construction, specifically to reveal its somewhat subjective foundations and to expose the fallacy of the primacy of a clear and formal narrative structure. Even in the 21st century, our experiences with literature begin with our learning of conventional storytelling structures. Typically, a hero embarks on a quest that ends in the hero's triumph, transformation, and return home. Or in the case of a tragedy, a journey that ends in the hero's own demise. However, metafiction upends our familiarity and reveals the ineffectiveness of stories to represent accurately what we might call real experiences. In this way, metafiction sits liminally in the space between criticism and fiction, because it suggests that language is incapable of describing reality despite our efforts, and that we should be wary of the same old story. Stories such as fairy tales that convince us that the world is predictable and will inevitably end happily ever after.
Hey, yeah, I wanna shoot, baby.
Kind of lonesome back here.
A little help here.
Excuse me.
Woo! Dopinder.
Pool. Dead.
Why the fancy red suit, Mr. Poole?
Oh, that's because it's Christmas Day, Dopinder. And I'm after someone on my naughty list. You're probably thinking this was a superhero movie, but that guy in the suit just turned that other guy into a kebab. Surprise. This is a different kind of superhero story.
As criticism, metafiction often appears as comedy or satire, as a deconstruction of common stereotypes or stereotypical stories, and thus allows us to laugh at them.
We're reviving a canceled undercover police program from the 80s and revamping it for modern times. You see, the guys in charge of this stuff lack creativity and are completely out of ideas.
However, the truth that it intends to reveal is that we place ourselves at the centers of our own narratives and invent our own stories as they make sense to us. Effectively, we choose to include only those details that we remember, or rather that we want to recall. In actuality, even those events that appear largely insignificant in the moment remain part of the complete story of us, the stories we tell about ourselves in order to explain how we become ourselves. Returning to metafiction, these stories are still essential, for they draw necessary boundaries around the world, and the truth is that to write is to give form to something, to give it shape and arguably bring something into being. Like a painting, stories don't exist until they are written, or to further the analogy, until lines are drawn and colors are applied, until finally we recognize what is in front of us. Metafiction's role as an agent of postmodern fiction is to lay bare the creative process itself, to ensure that we don't merely accept a work of art or a text as something that can ever be fully finished. Thus, metafiction prompts us to reconsider the nature of permanence, and especially the factual possibility of anything. It is this way that metafiction relates to history, because metafiction exists as finished works only temporarily, until other facts are uncovered. Because history is itself a narrative, the word story appears within the word history, for example, and it is capable of misrepresentation, of omitting stories, elements that were initially concealed or disregarded as unimportant or inconsequential. As such, metafiction invites us to look even more carefully for things we may have missed: events, characters, signs, and symbols. In fact, in our effort to read more carefully, we must pay attention to everything. Read it all, because who determines what part should be included and which should be left out?